Hello, everybody, and welcome to PolitiFest 2020. As we wait for people to hop on this stream, I'm just going to go over some quick notes to share with you guys. If you don't know much about Voice, we are a nonprofit investigative news organization committed to holding public officials accountable and giving you guys, the public, the tools that you need to be advocates for the public good. And as a nonprofit, we depend on members like you and donors to make our work possible. So thank you for your support and thank you for being here today. So I want to recognize our sponsors before we get started. The Google News Initiative for supporting the creation of this virtual event, the College of Arts and Sciences at USD for underwriting all student tickets, the San Diego Foundation for supporting our community conversations, and also thank you to Cox Communications, SDG&E, the Atlantis Group, the City of San Diego Retired Employees Association, City Heights Community Development Corporation, the San Diego County Democratic Party, and Business for Good. All right, so PolitiFest runs through noon on Saturday, October 3rd. You can see the full schedule at politifest.org. Several sessions are free throughout the event, as well as some sessions in both English and Spanish. So recordings for all of the sessions will be available after the event on our website. And questions for our panelists can go in the chat box below. You guys should see it on our webpage. If you're not already logged in through YouTube, you can do that pretty easily with your Gmail account. All right, and last but not least, you can also tweet along with the session and share your experience by using the hashtag PolitiFest2020. All right, and here's our moderator for the event, John Carroll, a reporter at KPBS.
Thank you very much, Megan. Welcome to this second evening of PolitiFest 2020. I am John Carroll with KPBS News, and this evening the race for the District 1 City Council seat in San Diego is our focus. The two candidates for the seat being vacated by Barbara Bree as she runs for mayor are Joe LaCava and Will Moore. All city council races are officially nonpartisan, but both Mr. LaCava and Mr. Moore are registered Democrats. The San Diego Democratic Party has not endorsed anyone in the race, but they have rated both Mr. LaCava and Mr. Moore as qualified. I should mention that both candidates have been involved on many boards and civic organizations in the city, too many to mention right now, but it's safe to say they've both given a lot of their personal time to civic causes. The district encompasses La Jolla, Torrey Pines, University City, Del Mar Heights, and Carmel Valley. Now, we will have a lot of people joining us for this discussion, and I'm sure a fair amount of you will want to ask questions to the candidates. I'll be watching for those, and we'll work them in as I can over the course of the next hour. We're going to start by giving each of the candidates 3 minutes for an opening statement, and at the end, we'll give them each 2 minutes for a closing statement. So let's begin with Joe LaCava, and as I say at the end, we will flip that and begin with Will Moore. Mr. LaCava, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, John, for that introduction, and thank you to Voice of San Diego for continuing the PolitiFest tradition here. When we entered the campaign as candidates, I think all the candidates, we had bright eyes and high expectations of what it would be like to be the next elected official. And then 2020 hit us and changed the landscape immeasurably. The pandemic affected all of us, whether it is our personal health or the health of our loved ones, the untimely death of those that perhaps had more serious physical ailments. And of course, there's been a lot of talk about the impact on our schools and education. It's also impacted our economy. Whether you may have lost a job, whether you're a small business and can't figure out the restrictions and how you can survive and navigate that, or whether you suddenly became an essential worker and now found a more dangerous workplace that you had to navigate. And of course, we have the fires here in California and locally that have been more intense, more destructive, and come up more frequently that we've had to deal with locally. And then some tragic moments and tragic deaths that have awakened to a much greater audience some of the tensions we have in our communities here in our city and across the country that have reminded us where we have been as a country and have really woken up folks and some of the changes that we need to see going forward. But to this conversation this hour, the economy has also affected city revenues. And we've already seen cuts in neighborhood services. And unfortunately, we can expect to see more neighborhood services as the pandemic stretches out. And I think it's important in this particular election, which is unique among all the elections, that we're going to be electing 5 council members. 5 seats out of the 9 are going to be turned over with brand new council members. And all of them are going to be first-time council members that are expected to come hit the road, hit the ground running and take on these challenges going forward. And so I think experience and expertise becomes particularly important for the next council members. And I'm very proud to say that I offer both. Expertise because I'm a civil engineer dealing with housing and infrastructure over the course of my career. Expertise that we don't have on city council and perhaps can tackle some of these issues that the city can't seem to wrap its hands around and plagues us to this day. But we also have the experience of working down at City Hall on behalf of neighbors and individuals, and even occasionally with a client or two, and built a reputation as somebody in the 10th floor or departments or city staff that has a good reputation going in, that shows leadership, that brings different voices together, that brings consensus so we tackle some of our city issues and helps our city pivot so that it can do a better job in serving our residents and our businesses going forward. I'm very proud of that track record, happy to talk more about that, including sitting on nearly 30 boards and committees, as John made a reference to. So I'm very excited about the opportunity to be the next council member for District 1, and I look to the next hour of conversation with John and Will. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. LaCava. You just about nailed it right on the 3 minutes. Mr. Moore, go right ahead, please.
Well, I very much appreciate you, Joe. John, thanks for having us. Glad to be here at PolitiFest. I've attended PolitiFest for years. I'm glad to be on a panel finally. I had to do it the hard way. But I'm glad to be here. I'm here running for San Diego's 1st District and City Council. We set out on this journey about a year and a half ago because this is a city in desperate need of leadership. We have a lot of very long-term problems that we have not done a very good job of addressing for many, many years. We do not create enough housing in this town to just house our own children. We do not get homeless people off the street in anywhere near a respectable way. I and my neighbors up here in District 1, University City, Carmel Valley, La Jolla, I had to come a long way to get here. I was born in a little town called Macon, Georgia. Grew up in one of the poorest neighborhoods in America. Of course, you don't know that at the time. I looked up some statistics really during this campaign and found that out. Got a scholarship to Georgia Tech, and I've continued with the process of spending my entire life trying to give back. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa, in Tambacounda, Senegal, where I learned to speak French and Wolof, neither of which are particularly useful in San Diego, but it's good to have that breadth of experience. Then I went to Columbia Law, a place where, folks from my neighborhood don't really end up. I've been here in San Diego, which is where we moved to get some support when we had my son. That was about a decade and a half ago because we had family out here. And I embraced this community and embraced me. And I found that, I'm a guy who came from a long way away, did well in school, did well in some job things, ended up here in these nice neighborhoods. And then I walk around these neighborhoods and I learned that, that story isn't that unique in District 1. Folks have done well, and they have focused on the long-term problems that their careers and their professions set out for them. But here in the city of San Diego, we don't live up to that standard that the folks at District 1 have. We will argue about scooters and football teams for decades at a time while people live out on the street, while rents are 50 to 70% of people's incomes. And we don't focus on getting things done in the long term. Now, we have some factions. We have some differences of opinion here in the city, some of them here in this race, where we have folks that would really prefer San Diego just stay the same town it was in 1970 or 1980. I'm here because that's not how the folks in District 1 solve their problems. We look out 10 years, 20 years, 30 years to what a city can be. And that's why I'm running for office.
All right. Thank you, sir, so much. Let's move ahead to some questions. I'd like to start by talking about Prop 15. I know that's an issue that is of concern to both of you. And Mr. Moore, let me go to you first on this. Would you please give me your position on Prop 15 and why you hold that position?
Well, I would be very interested to see what Joe's position is on this today, because it tends to change back and forth. I've been very consistent in favor of Prop 15, in favor of split roll. Right now, we have a number of problems in our state. We have a disjointed tax system where, based on whether you purchased your property with some fancy lawyering for a commercial property, or whether a long time ago or more recently, you have a completely different tax basis and a completely different basis for competing with other businesses. And I don't think that's right. Now, I don't think we need a giant tax increase in the middle of a pandemic. That's certainly a concern, but there are things we can do to offset that total tax shock. I don't think that's necessarily the strongest argument against, because there are things we can do to countervail. But I do think that California has created a major problem for itself by gamifying its tax system based on how good your lawyer is and how long you've been in a particular place. This will take away disincentives not to develop property, because right now, if you have a property that's not very interesting, you build something on it and your tax basis steps up. You can hold a piece of property for a long time. There are good exemptions within Prop 15. So if more than half of the tenants on your property are small businesses, you get rolled into that system a lot later in 25 and 26. And I think overall, and it's a tough call all the time when you're trying to fix a long-term problem like this that has created some real disjoints in our tax system. Overall, this is a necessary thing for us to do to grow as Californians. And I have been consistent about that. And I know there might be people in this audience that might disagree. And that's fine. We can disagree with each other. But what I will say is I will always tell you straight out, and I won't pretend to misunderstand the question, and I won't say one thing to one audience and one thing to the other, which is what my opponent got caught doing about a week and a half ago. I will be straight with you. I'm going to tell you how we're going to do it. And yes, I do support Prop 15.
All right. Mr. LaCava?
The question was about Prop 15 and not what the opponent was talking about. So I won't waste the audience's time responding.
Let me just clear that up for a second. You were talking about rent control, right, Mr. Moore? Is that what you were?
No. Also, we had a little flip-flop on Prop 15, and it was discussed pretty extensively in the Voice of San Diego's own politics report about 10 days ago.
Okay. Well, Mr. LaCava, what about that? Have you flip-flopped on that issue?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think you're going to see a difference in the leadership styles that each of us will bring to City Council, and so the audience can judge on that. I have taken a no position on Prop 15. I've been asked twice during endorsement questions, and both times I said I was opposed to it, and it cost me an endorsement. You don't flip-flop to cost yourself an endorsement. So let's stop this silliness. I am saying no to Prop 15 because it does provide a major shift much too fast, and especially during the course of a pandemic. And it can be trickled down through these triple net leases and affect small businesses. I've talked to a number of individuals that are quite concerned about the impact of Prop 15. And I have been consistent on that position whenever I've been asked about Prop 15. But I think it's the wrong time. It's unfortunate. People have been working on this for a long time. And that is of concern. Who knew the pandemic was going to change the economy and the dynamics here? But I think that Prop 15 is the wrong thing at the wrong time. There is a better way to tackle some of the issues that have been raised by the proponents of Prop 15. Unfortunately, when you get something on the ballot, you're really kind of stuck with the language that has been adopted. And I know there's going to be folks in the audience that will be more inclined to agree with my colleague here on voting yes. And I know there'll be some folks out there that will be more inclined to also vote no, as I will be.
Thank you, sir.
May I just clarify, because Joe, you've over the past couple of years, you've told a lot of people you were in favor of what we call split roll, which is what Prop 15 is there to implement. Why has your position on that changed?
Well, let's see. I told a organization that I was in favor of split roll that hurt me. So let's do a little track record here. The 3 times that I actually spoke and during the endorsement process, it hurt me all 3 times. That's not flip-flopping. That is having a disagreement about what that means. Split roll is a concept. I am in support of the concept, but when it comes down to, and the most challenging things that I think we as Californians with these initiatives, and that folks who sit on public boards have to confront, and then when you're an elected official, is the difference between the value and the big concept and the specific language in front of you. Am I in support of split roll and looking at how we can make that change? Yes. Is Prop 15 the way to do that? My answer is no.
Okay, but you did answer that split roll question after the language for Prop 15 was already set.
They didn't ask about Prop 15. In late 2019, I got asked specifically about Prop 15, and I indicated that at that time I was not supporting, and I know it cost me an endorsement.
When in late 2019 was that?
I know you're a lawyer, Will. I don't know that I came prepared for the exact date on that.
All right. Well, let's move along. Since we're sort of talking about finances there in a way, Barbara Bree, the council member you're both looking to replace, in her State of the District address last year, talked about, and remember, this is pre-pandemic, that the mayor's 5-year budget showed San Diego at that point would have a $74 million deficit for fiscal year 2020. Obviously, because of the pandemic, we're in a much worse financial situation now. So I'd like to hear from both of you on how you would approach the budget in this challenging time. Mr. Moore, why don't you take the first go with that?
Well, we have the shortfall is significant. And if we don't have major federal stimulus funds coming through, we're going to have some real problems in the city of San Diego. About a quarter of our city budget is down, and that's going to be a real problem. We're going to have a number of other long-term problems. We're going to have to defer some of our physical maintenance, unfortunately, because that's the thing you can put off for about 6 months. It's not ideal. It ultimately ends up costing more in the long term. But our options are to stop services that are necessary. You know, you got to keep your public safety. What this does is it boils us down to what does the city really absolutely have to do to keep the lights on. You got to keep people safe. You got to keep things from burning down. And I would say your third thing is you got to keep those libraries open, because those are major public resources that we all depend on, that our school kids depend on, that we depend on, especially in this time where people are doing a lot of homeschooling, and those are some of our hotspots. So yeah, it's going to be a struggle, and there's no way to sugarcoat it. It's going to be hard. We're going to have to look for those federal stimulus funds. That's pretty much what's gotten us through this year. We have some positions that we're not counting and not filling on staff as in the short term, but that's not going to really work in the long term. We're ultimately going to have to figure out a way to fit through this little keyhole and come out on the other side as a stronger town.
Mr. LaCava, what if we don't get those federal stimulus funds?
Well, I think as everybody has acknowledged, that we already saw when the 2022 budget was passed that we had to make cuts because we were already predicting a shortfall, as you described, John. And then we began to see the negative effects of the pandemic, realizing that our revenue stream is not as diverse and isn't as flexible to overcome when these kinds of moments happen. On the other hand, a pandemic is so extraordinary, it can be difficult to prepare for that. And the key is really the federal dollars, and I'm hopeful that that the bickering that we see in Washington, D.C. can be resolved and they can move forward in terms of providing another package of the CARES Act or the HEROES Act as would be appropriate. And if we don't get that, we're really going to be cutting to the bone. Now, some would argue that we're already cut to the bone, and we're going to have to do some very difficult conversations to prioritize. And certainly public safety, which includes police, fire, and lifeguards, is the primary responsibility of the city. We should be okay with water and sewer because that's an enterprise fund. that can be handled by the ratepayers. And to the degree that they continue to pay that rate, we should be okay. But let's be clear. This is going to be a very difficult time for our city and cities across. I look forward to whatever assistance the county might have, especially in that public safety element, as they continue to step up and provide, for lack of a better term, the social services in helping to deal with people that are homeless, redirect them to services, those people with physical conditions, addictions that need greater help that really is not appropriate for police to be spending time on. So there is not a single answer to that, John. It's incredibly important and it's going to take the 9 council members and the mayor working hand in hand to really get this right. And of course, with the input of the public to help guide us on priorities.
Something else that has to do with city finances, and it's a big issue in the news right now in San Diego, is what you might call the Ash Street debacle. Mm-hmm. That is obviously a big issue in the race between Barbara Bree and Todd Gloria right now. I would like to get both of your thoughts on that. Mr. Moore, let me go back over to you for that. First of all, just give me your general thoughts on how it came about, but more importantly, if you can tell me, how can the city council, not let a disaster like that happen again?
Yeah, I think that I'll take those two in turn, Ash Street specifically and the more systemic problem. Ash Street is, we bought an old piece of property, an old building downtown. You buy buildings built in that era, there's asbestos in it. There's no question that there's asbestos in it. It would be preposterous to think there wasn't. And so what you have to do is make sure that when you fix it up so you can move in there, because it's been occupied for years and years before with nobody getting mesothelioma. What you do is you make sure you get it renovated in the right way. And I think that's where our problems come in. There appear to be some problems in the purchase process that are very San Diego-like, and I think those come from some of our systemic oversight problems, which I'll get to now. The city of San Diego switched to strong mayor back about a little more than a decade ago. We still have the same fundamental council structure in the council offices that we had back when we could talk more and direct city staff and have a little more influence over what city staff was doing and look into what they were doing. Right now, we have the same number of people who have a more detached oversight role. And it's just not good enough. What we've found is the city council can't, as a separate legislative branch, has not been set up to be a separate legislative branch with the ability to investigate and really ask the right sort of questions and get the proper sorts of answers out of the executive branch. And it's those checks and balances are what we were trying to do with strong mayor. But we don't have that right now. And I think that, it's great fodder for council members to blame each other as to, you were in the council office this year and you were in the council office this year. I think that that doesn't really get to the heart of our problem. So I'm not going to take sides on that, but I will say that we need to think about whether we have a council structure that is set up to do that legislative oversight job that it has to do to make the strong mayor system work properly.
Mm-hmm. Mr. LaCava, what about Ash Street, and what about how Mr. Moore framed the larger systemic problem there?
Obviously, as candidates at this time, we have the benefit of hindsight, but it does indicate some problems, which many have talked about. Just the fact that you buy an old building as is certainly a red flag, and I would like to think that there were emails flying around about, are you really sure? Are we really sure we want to do this? Because to do that on an old building. Yeah, I think the public generally is aware that a lot of our old buildings, our schools, have asbestos in it, but it is a well understood concept in how you deal with it, which is basically you don't touch it. So the fact that it was strictly an as-is purchase was certainly the first red flag that I think we can all agree on. And having been involved in a number of real estate deals and permitting and projects over the years, one of the things that I've seen is that when a project gets handed off from one group to another group, there's often a lack of communication. So, the first group maybe understood the asbestos and the limitations of that in terms of refurbishing and occupying the building. And perhaps that second group wasn't really informed that the reason we were going to keep the capacity at a much lower number was that we couldn't touch the walls. We couldn't start to expose that asbestos. And perhaps, I don't know, but that's a speculation on my part from what I've seen in other areas. I think there is a broad agreement that the city operates in an unusual time frame. The mayor takes all the time it needs. The mayor's office takes all the time it needs before it brings an idea in front of the council. The council then is pressured to make a decision quickly to ratify something. We've studied it enough. We've learned enough. Let's get it done. Just approve it. We'll take care of the issues later. And we see that happening over and over again. And too often that leads to what was clearly a bad decision. You know, I've often thought about the idea, having watched the city council hearings over the years, that why doesn't the city council have the benefit of what the planning commission does? Has a city attorney, has their own city attorney, has a city engineer, has staff there that are answerable to the city council. And initially I used to think that was really the way to go about it. But I think that creates another layer of bureaucracy that we really can't afford. And I'm joining what a lot of people are starting to say, that maybe the strong mayor form of government really wasn't the job. It really was not a matter of checks and balances. It was about a strong mayor that would lead our city forward on the big issues, and the city council taking care of the day-to-day stuff. And it's clearly not turned out that way. And I think, John, there's a larger issue about how the city approaches real estate deals to begin with, in terms of whether it's an acquisition or the disposition of city-owned land. I think there is a conversation to be had there that we fail to see our responsibility in meeting some of the social needs, including housing, when we think about land being identified as access, and how we can tackle housing that is restricted to low income and moderate incomes to help solve that problem. And we're just simply not doing that. And we're not doing that over and over again.
Right. We have a viewer question, and so I'd like to go ahead and go to that from Will Collin Diamond. And Will asks, what are the candidates' positions on historic designation of public buildings suitable for affordable housing? Exactly sure of the wording there, but he says an example would be the Mission Hills Library, and I'm sure you're both, even though it's not in District 1, you're familiar with that issue. It's now run up against folks who are concerned about historic preservation. I would guess those are fans of mid-century modern architecture, and they're trying to shoot down the city's plans to use that for affordable housing. So, Mr. Moore, what think you on that subject?
Well, the historic designation can be abused, frankly. And I think that without having a great deal of background, and I haven't reviewed the files on this particular thing, so I'm going to speak more generally. The historic designation can be abused because it limits a land use for a reason that's very, very subjective. And listen, I and my son, our hobby, when we have, an era we can travel in, what we do is we go to old cities in the world. We go to your London, your Paris, your Rome, your Florence, and we look at fantastic old historical things. And we have some of those in San Diego. But I think it's difficult to say that a building built in the middle of the 19th century that's been a library is historically designated, and suddenly
the 20th century.
20th century. Thank you. I always get
it's not that old. Yeah.
Skip precisely. So I have concerns about how much of the good faith historical approach was taken there. And I think that if we have a historic resources board, we need one that we can have confidence in, will put the historicity of a site first, and not just use it as an interference with a potential use that maybe some people in the neighborhood don't like. We have ways to take in that input on whether people in the neighborhood like or don't like a project. That's fine. But to go the historic route and really just subvert the entire process, I don't think is appropriate. And I think we, if we find that's happening, then we need to review the entire system under which that's being done.
Mr. LaCava, what about that idea about historic buildings being used for other things or preserving them in the process?
Sure. And John, anytime you actually want to go to me first and give Will a little bit of a break, I'm happy to do that. So
thank you.
I know it's hard to keep track, so no worries there. You know, this issue is actually a little bit an old issue. The idea that that library was going to be abandoned in favor of the brand new library that sits there on Washington, a pretty spectacular library, if I do say so myself. There's been quite a few years that have that opportunity to really look at that. Now, I believe in historic designations. I think it really preserves an element of our past that we ought to acknowledge and celebrate. So I'm not opposed. I've worked with historical societies. I worked with Soho in that regards. But the fact that this really didn't come up until the idea of permanent supportive housing was being proposed for the site. I don't know the site as well to understand whether permanent supportive housing is a good location on that site. But this is the kind of thing that our city needs to be doing and taking advantage of publicly owned lands because the cost of permanent supportive housing, income restricted housing is so astronomical. We have to use publicly owned land to leverage to bring the cost down and be able to build more units. You know, we have a very strict process here in the city of how projects are having to be analyzed and justified going through. And I like to believe in this system there that they look beyond the politics or the emotions and look at the facts and the kinds of things that it takes to do that kind of designation. Let's not make any mistake. We don't want to be using these tools to interfere with the city meeting the social needs of San Diegans.
I think it was considered a good location because of its proximity to all sorts of things you can walk to and to public transportation as well.
Yeah.
But that'll work its way through the system, and on we go. And speaking of housing, let's turn to a chronically large issue, and that is homelessness. So, Mr. LaCava, I will indeed start with you this time. Something that Council Member Bree said in her address last year that we lack a comprehensive data-driven homeless plan. And she said we lacked a lot of other things too, which I may get to. But what about that? Do we not have a data-driven homeless plan? How do we get one? How do we work on it? What do you think?
Well, you know, I think we can do better. And I think the fundamental issue here is that we have identified really the process that is the only process that has proven successful across the country. And it is called Housing First. Maybe, I don't know if that's really the best name for it, but it is called Housing First. We actually hired someone who had implemented Housing First in his hometown. And he didn't stick around very long. And one can only imagine the frustration he must have had. And unfortunately, our strategy was to not move forward on Housing First, but to conduct another study that concluded that no one should be surprised. Let's go forward with Housing First. We have had a disjointed approach to the needs of the homeless because we're so focused on the needs of those folks that find themselves on the sidewalks, in the canyons, forced to live in their cars. And unfortunately, some of the dialogue that comes out of City Hall, I find a little distressing because it tries to identify those that are homeless as all having drug addiction, all having mental illness. And we know that's not the case. There's people with full-time jobs that found a financial emergency that forced them out of their house, forced them perhaps even to live in a car. I think one of our candidates here in our city lived in his car for a while. So that has interfered with the conversation. And the frustration of businesses in a number of neighborhoods and finding an individual is always problematic. But the fact is, we know what the solution is. We have to come together to figure out how we're going to build permanent supportive housing for those individuals that need those wraparound services, and to figure out rapid rehousing for those individuals that just need a month or two of a break on rent, and they can get on their feet and back into a house again. So we have a very clear path. We really ought to start working on that. And we have kind of a little bit of a golden opportunity despite the pandemic, because we have all these individuals that are currently housed in the convention center. Let's see if we can actually get our act in gear and actually move forward on that. Purchasing hotels, I'm not sure about the price tags that they're looking at, but I think that's certainly a step in the right direction, long overdue. I was always disappointed that we didn't buy distressed real estate property back in 2008 when there was a lot of properties that could have been picked up at a good price.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been a package to solving our homelessness problem. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Moore, what about the chronic issue of homelessness?
Well, when we talk about a data-driven homelessness plan, I have a little bit of a hesitancy when we start talking about another plan. So we have a new group of people take office. They spend 2 years coming up with this plan. Everybody takes credit for themselves and pats themselves on the back. Nothing's actually happened yet. When you look at a flood and it's coming into the boat here, start bailing at some point. You gotta actually help solve this problem. Our problem in San Diego is we have astronomical rents and housing prices. That we got people paying 50%, 70% of their income in rent, working 2 jobs, hardworking people. And if something happens to your income for just a little bit, you're out on the street. That's where our homelessness problem comes from. And yes, our folks, some folks have other problems, and you got your drug addiction, you got your mental illness, but that's only about a third to tops a half, according to all of the figures we have. So what we need to figure out is what is our priority, and our priority should be housing. If you have, and we can have all these programs where we subsidize this and we encourage that and we do this. If you have 10 people and 9 places to live, one person is going to be out on the street, and you're just picking which one at some point. We need to be aggressive and realistic about getting housing built in this town. Right now, it takes 3 to 10 years just to get a permit. You can go up to development services 5, 15 times and do everything they say and not get your permit. That creates massive economic carrying costs where you got to sit on a piece of land while it doesn't do anything and pay that bank for the money you borrowed or whoever you borrowed the money from. And those costs inch up, and they result in not just average working people, even people on up the economic scale. I rent this place here in Carmel Valley. I'm probably paying $10,000 or more, $1,000 or more a month than I would be in a place with a reasonable housing supply. And that's the problem we have to solve. But the problem we face when we try to do that is you got to build it somewhere. We had a hearing on a piece of land, I think 2 days ago, maybe it was yesterday, where everybody came and testified, oh, I want affordable housing. I think affordable housing is great, but not here, but not in this neighborhood. Now, I don't know why everybody thinks affordable housing is great, but for some reason, nobody ever tries to build it where, people say, oh, yeah, this is the place to build it. And so we need to address that problem as well, because we have created all of these breakpoints and hurdles to getting housing built in this town. And we're eventually going to have some hard conversations that everybody's going to have to do a little part. And maybe your neighborhood can take 10 apartments or 20 apartments that aren't exactly like everything else in the neighborhood. And unless we have that honest conversation without some opposing politician saying, no, you gotta protect neighborhood character, then we're not going to solve this homeless problem. And when people say don't build it here, we got to recognize that the folks where you're saying go build it are also going to say not build it here. So we need to address this problem forthrightly and really have those hard conversations about how we're going to get more housing in this town.
It's a tough one. Let's move on to another viewer question, and we have a little less than 15 minutes left, by the way. Okay. This comes from Alyssa S., and she asks, and this is certainly in the news these days, how will each of you respond to, and this is her characterization of it, I want to make clear, the San Diego Police Department's violations of the rights of protesters this summer and in general to stop police brutality. Mr. LaCava, let's go to you first.
Well, we certainly, as I mentioned in my opening comments, have seen a sea change and a greater awareness of the tensions in so many of our communities here in San Diego and across the country. And it is unfortunate that it took tragic incidents and tragic deaths to finally waken people up and finally start a dialogue that folks have, been talking about for years. And in fact, I was talking about, and we were talking about in the Police Community Relations Board. There is that challenge of a protest. When the protest gets infiltrated by people that see it as an opportunity to cause trouble, that want the protesters not to be peaceful, but to be angry, or the folks that go down there because they see the police is distracted by the protest and sees an opportunity to break into adjoining buildings. And so we have to really be diligent. I'm really proud of all the folks that have organized protests and how aggressively they have worked to try to ensure that these are really peaceful protests. And the police, haven't had a lot of training in this. And we can't forget that because of the reductions in the police force over the past several years, we have a lot of young police officers that have not been exposed to that. And we have a big loss in mid-career individuals that have that experience under their belt that could have provided better leadership. I think we're finally having the dialogue. I'm not sure that it's moving fast enough, but I appreciate some of the things that we have heard recently. I'm looking forward to the new council and the new mayor to be much more aggressive about that. We had a backlog of policy changes that we were trying to get through the police department that finally the dam broke free and we were starting to get some of those. We have a long way to go. And it is really about a couple of things. It is about how officers are trained. It is about the field training officers that deal with the new recruits having 5-10 years under their belt instead of 4 years under their belt. It is about talking about not just de-escalation of, yes, that's something we do, but now to have it an enforceable policy for the first time. Those things will begin to build. It won't change overnight, but at least we're starting on the right path. It's going to be bumpy for a while. There's no doubt about that. But I think we're on the right path. I'm very curious to hear about the results from RIPA, the Racial Identity Profiling Act, which we have yet to see any information on. The Odyssey was a little concerned about how data was being presented. That will really be the proof in the pudding. No more anecdotal stories. Let's get some hard facts on this. But we need to see changes, and we need to implement them on a timely, effective way. People have raised legitimate concerns. This is what leadership is about, stepping up and reacting to them, not for a photo op or a soundbite, but because it's the right thing to do, and defining who we are as a city.
Right. Mr. Moore, what about that? Do you want me to say the question again, or are you okay with that?
No, I got it.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, though. This is really fundamental to who I am. I grew up in a poor neighborhood. We were the white family. Me and my little brother, the only white kids in the neighborhood, and we were that underserved community where and this isn't the SDBD, this is the Macon police, would come around and start poking around when you didn't call them, but you called them and they were nowhere to be found. Crack house right down the street, all of the attendant problems that you had in the late 80s. And what we saw was not good policing. I watched the 1992 riots outside my window in Techwood Homes. I watched our entire community step up. We had a 600-person Black Lives Matter protest right here at the corner of Del Mar Heights and El Camino Real in Carmel Valley, which I was very proud of the community for bringing together. And with that, I think it's time that, we got a lot of people have been trying to have this conversation for a very long time, and they've been ignored. And even when we do say, good Democrats, when we do say, oh, we got to do something about those police, we don't admit to ourselves that we have set up a structure where, we're the ones that, call the police when somebody just looks out of place coming down the neighborhood in what are still pretty segregated communities. We're the ones who, post on Nextdoor that, hey, there's somebody suspicious wandering around when all they're doing is walking past. And we need to look at ourselves and the way and the things we ask our police to do. If we ask our police to do our dirty work on race, it's not really fair to not, look back at ourselves. And the police know that we ask them to do things that are not necessarily part of the peacekeeping job, and they do the best they can. In a lot of times, and we have some folks that don't do great. We have a police review board initiative here on in a couple months that I think both Joe and I support. That I think will help instill that community and really get us towards a place where our police force and our community can get closer together and build a little more trust. But yeah, there are places in this town that our police force just doesn't have that trust with some parts of the community. And I think we need to recognize that, and we need to address it aggressively. We're not the worst place in the country, but everybody will admit that we could stand to do better. And I think we need to take that charge seriously and recognize that this is not an issue that just came up this year or just came up with George Floyd or just came up with Breonna Taylor, but an issue that's been going on for, 200 and something years. And it's time to address it, because this is literally tearing America apart. And we need to take this very seriously right now.
Something else which I'm quite certain you both take very seriously is climate change. The viewer Max Leister asks, what actions do you plan on taking to combat climate change on a city level? Now, the city has a climate action plan. How well it's being implemented is up for discussion. But what do you think about that? And Mr. Moore, I'll go with you this time, and Mr. LaCava, I'll let you start next time.
Sure. This is another situation where the plans are great. Plans are a great way for us to all pat ourselves on the back. Hey, we passed a plan. Isn't that great? We're going to, in 15 years, do something. But we need to take concrete action, or 15 years is going to roll around and it's going to be like pretending you're going to go to the gym one day and lose some weight. And it just doesn't work that way. What we need to do is put housing near where people work, so we don't have a huge proportion of our population commuting in from the exurbs. We need to have other ways to get around. I've been very heartened to find, as I talk to thousands and thousands of people in this district, we have some good enthusiasm for some alternative means of transit. Even people that know they're never going to get out of their car, and you got that sales job and you got to take 6 trips a day. You're not going to get out of your car, but maybe if your neighbor has a steady path and they're going to and from work at a reliable time, then they can take the bus and not be in your traffic, or take the train and not be in your traffic. And I found more enthusiasm for that than I really had ever expected, especially in a neighborhood like a Carmel Valley, University City of La Jolla. So we have these opportunities, but we have to make those hard decisions to get that housing built, to get that transit built, to get that transit funded. And those are the biggest things that cities can do. Obviously, we have impacts, and we need to deal with the long-term impacts of climate. We're going to have some sea level rise. That's going to really hurt our Mission Beach properties. That's only the eastern half of Mission Beach is only about 2 feet above sea level, and we're going to have to figure out a way to make sure that those houses, we got to figure out what to do with them. And so we're going to have that mitigation plan going forward, and actually make sure that we take care of our community in the long term. But if we don't start making those decisions today to get people into a life that they can choose and be happy and comfortable in a less carbon intensive way, then it's just not going to happen. Planning is great, but planning is just talk if you don't actually do it.
Mm-hmm. Mr. LaCava, what to do about climate change on our local level?
Sure. That's an incredibly important question. I've been honored with the endorsements of a number of environmental organizations. We started this process when we adopted the Climate Action Plan, but unfortunately it was too much of a soundbite and a photo op, as so happens in this town. There's an amazing number of organizations that are carrying the torch on this, and I'm so grateful for them. I was the second person. Nicole Capritz was, of course, the first person that went down to City Council and testified that our community plan updates were one of the primary vehicles by which we were going to meet the goal of our climate action plan. The North Park community plan, where the city wanted less density than what the planning group asked for. The Uptown community plan, where the city was actually going to downzone. And we went down there and vocally raised our opposition to that because, again, putting those homes, you have to, if you want to eliminate the 3 to 10 year cycle that my colleague refers to, you have to get the zoning right. You have to make it by right construction. We have to make it a lot easier for home builders to build homes in those areas. And we start by getting the community plan updates, getting that located properly, and allow them to build it just by walking down to City Hall and getting a building permit. Now we have to do better in making it easier to build, getting a building permit. But I think the hard part for leaders in this conversation has to be to stand up and said, yes, we've met some of the goals in our climate action plan, but it didn't require us to do anything at all. State mandates and requirements such as that really carried us through the initial parts of the climate action plan. And now we're going to have the tougher conversations, because now we're talking about reducing vehicle miles traveled, and we haven't prepared ourselves in terms of having a more robust transit, having safer bike routes. But the silver lining out of the pandemic, I think, may be an important step for us if we can sustain that momentum. And that is because people are now completely rethinking what their commute is all about. Businesses that probably were adamant against distance working may say, hey, it actually works. We can actually downsize our office a bit, and it would be good for the employee and good for the employer. We're also seeing a tremendous increase in the number of people taking up biking, and they may now have the confidence to continue to use that as part of their commute, or certainly for some of their local trips in lieu of a single occupancy car. So that's really, I think, the key in terms of what we're going to do is not lose the momentum that this pandemic, as fortunate as terrible as it has been, can really benefit us, and also start the conversation about some of the more difficult issues. We do talk about the impacts of fire, and we have to take that much more seriously. A lot of our communities, especially here in District 1, are right up against natural habitats and wildlands, and to be serious about that. But also in terms of, I'm gonna have a moment here, but also in terms of the sea level rise. City of Del Mar had a very ugly conversation about sea level rise. And so it's going to take leaders that are willing to step up and tell people what they need to hear, because you're talking about public infrastructure that will be impacted. You're talking about private property that's going to be impacted, and it is not going to be a pleasant conversation. And we need to start having that conversation now. And we have to start taking seriously when we see proposals like Rewild that will give a greater ability to absorb some of that sea level rise, start to restore some of our natural habitats that can actually be a beneficial in dealing with sea level rise. It's complex, but with the right leadership down at City Hall, on City Council and the Mayor's office, we will take this on, and we will continue the momentum from the initial climate action plan, what we've learned during the pandemic, and carry us forward.
Yeah, as you were referring to the issue in Del Mar, I'm spacing on what the actual name of it is. It's retreat, some forced retreat or whatever it is.
Managed
retreat. Thank you so much, Mr. Moore. Just that in and of itself, just that one little part shows how tough this larger issue is going to be.
Exactly.
All right. Well, just like I have on the TV and radio side of my business, I have a producer on this side. It's Megan Wood with the Voice of San Diego, and she has asked us to go ahead and wrap up. So Megan, they both have time for their closing statements, yes?
Yes, of course. And thank you guys for being here, and thank you for everyone who's watching. Joe, Will, if you guys want to finish up with your closing statements.
Right, so we're going to begin the closing with Mr. Moore and then Mr. LaCava. Go ahead, sir.
Well, thanks for hosting this debate, y'all. I think we have a lot of good issues that we've gone through. Obviously, there's a whole universe of other issues we weren't able to get through in this 1 hour debate. I am shocked that it's already 5:53 p.m. and we've already been here for this short period of time. My name is Will Moore. I'm a Carmel Valley dad. I'm a Columbia law grad. I've been advising small businesses, mid-sized businesses for the past 15 years. I help people who have complex problems get together and work them out when they're not getting along very well. I think that's an important skill to have down at City Hall. And I think that my experience with all of the nonprofits I've advised, all the boards I've served on, from the San Diego Leadership Alliance to Business for Good to the Urban League, Young Professionals, to the Consolidated Plan Advisory Board at the city, those have helped me hone my understanding of our community, hone my understanding of how our city works. And that's what earned me the endorsements of 18, 19, 20, I lost track, former elected officials, people who know this job. And so we've put together this broad coalition, Republican, Democrat, and we're going to work past those issues that have had us batting heads for the past 20 years, such that we haven't been able to get things done. We have an opportunity in San Diego right now, and this is the chance. 2020 is the shot. This election right now is the shot to make this a city that works for everybody, to make this a city our kids can afford to live, to plant that tree that we might never sit under. Cities are built on 50, 100-year timeframes. We need to look ahead. We need to look at where we want to go. And we need to be aggressive and honest about what our challenges are. I'm the guy who's going to do that, and I hope you'll vote for me on November 3rd. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. LaCava, if you would.
Sure. Well, I want to thank John and my colleague for the debate. That, like you said, there's a whole lot of issues we can get to, and thank you to The Voice for hosting this and figuring out how to navigate the pandemic. That's a great tradition here in our town. My name is Jolla, and I'm running for San Diego City Council. Been here in the district for 35 years. My wife is a public school teacher. We've raised 2 daughters here. While I'm up here campaigning, she's downstairs trying to figure out how to teach 5-year-olds via Zoom. And I appreciate her passion and her heart in doing that. I'm running for this office because as a part-time volunteer, trying to drive public policy, trying to understand where the city works and doesn't work, working with coalitions and organizations who see the same kinds of problems. There just isn't change fast enough down at City Hall. And I know that being a city council member and working full-time with the staff, I can bring the kind of changes that need to be done. I've been given the assignment in the public space. Working with business is great, important, but until you work in a Brown Act board and have to have a working group discussion in front of the public, you don't really appreciate how difficult it is to work in the government sector. I have that experience. I've shown my values time and time again. I've created a track record that has allowed me to bring disparate voices together, build consensus, and move our city forward. A lot of things about a multi-billion-dollar operation that not everybody appreciates and sees or makes the front page of the media, but I've been proud of what I've been able to do and help the city pivot in a lot of positive directions. We have a lot more work to do. I've talked about housing and the homeless and climate change and what I call social equity, dealing with San Diegans across our city to have the opportunity as my priorities on a citywide basis. I look forward to the opportunity. The website is joellacava.com. For the viewers in District 1, I would love to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LaCava. And I'm sorry we didn't get to more questions. When I was thinking about how to do this, I really think it's better that the candidates get some time to flesh out their answers to questions instead of trying to force a lot more into shorter spaces, which is usually what we do in my business. Anyway, I would like to thank...
Joe and I have both done the 1-minute ones, and we know how it's so hard. Yeah,
I don't think it's quite as informative. But I'd like to thank both of you for spending this time to answer the viewers' questions and mine as well. Thanks also to the Voice of San Diego, including the other way. There we go, Megan Wood right there, and Julianne Marco for their hard work putting this all together. I'm John Carroll from KPBS. Megan, back to you.
Thank you, John. So we have a couple more
John.
panels tonight. If you guys want to join us, you can go back to the event site. And again, if you get lost, just go back to politifest.org. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Joe, Will, John. See you guys later.
Thank you, Megan. All right. Good night.